Good evening, everyone. This is Steve Lookner with Right Side Broadcasting. We are coming to you with some breaking news tonight on the Florida school shooting from last week, and that news is pretty stunning. The news is as follows. There was on school campus during the shooting an armed school officer. The official title is I'll give it to you in 1 second here. Armed Sheriff's Deputy, I'm seeing in. I have one article says Armed Sheriff's Deputy. One article says Armed Police Officer. So we'll get all the details. But there was an armed officer, an armed deputy on the property who was supposed to go in during the shooting, into the building where the shooting was, and engage the shooter. That was what the job was. The Broward Sheriff, just in the last couple hours, I believe about an hour ago, the Broward County Sheriff announced that surveillance video has revealed that this armed officer never went in the building. The armed officer took up a position outside the building, but never went in during the entire shooting, which went on for several minutes. So this is brand new information. Let me just make sure here you can hear. That, guys. Sorry, I was having I wasn't hearing anything from the broadcast, and I was like, oh my gosh, can you guys not hear me? But you can hear me. So this is a very surprising development, and I could see people thinking this has some ramification on the whole gun control debate, because it makes the event look a bit different than it looked before. And we wanted to come on and do a live stream on this. We wanted to get your opinion about this. We want to read you some stories on it. I happened to be checking out the news coverage right when this broke, and both CNN and MSNBC, Wolf Blitzer on CNN and Chuck Todd on MSNBC, all they did is they read the story, and then there was literally, I'm not kidding you, literally no analysis of the story on CNN or MSNBC when it first broke. No one discussed it. They never said, does this maybe change our people's thoughts about what kind of gun control measures are required to prevent these kind of things from happening in the future? Literally no discussion when the story broke on CNN or MSNBC. I actually turned it on Fox, and they weren't discussing it either. So anyways, we wanted to come on and do full coverage of the story. We think it's a big story. It's certainly stunning news. And it certainly changes the narrative. Whatever you think about gun control, it changes the narrative of what happened that day. So we wanted to cover it for you and come on the air. If you have comments about it, we're going to read your comments really soon. Write to me on Twitter, at Lookner, at Lookner. Let me just do one more quick check here. Stunning news. Okay, good. So we're good on the sound. Everything is working good. All right, so the first thing I want to do, though, is get I want to turn my speaker down. And then I want to just show you the facts about this story. So, and by the way, thank you for JC and Guinevere for being in the chat room and moderating, and Common Sense and Gleno moderating on the website. All right, so let's look at the story here. Let's get the details on this. Here's a story from the Miami Herald. Stoneman Douglas School is where this happened. The story is Douglas school cop who never went in after the shooting has resigned. This was a school cop who was armed, and the school cop never went into the building during the shooting. The cop was suspended for this, and now the cop has resigned. Let's read the story in the Miami Herald. Broward Sheriff Scott Israel said Thursday the school resource officer stationed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School was suspended without pay after the sheriff learned the deputy never went into the building when the shooting began. The deputy, Scott Peterson, chose to resign and retire this morning, Thursday morning. That deputy chose to resign and retire after the deputy had been suspended without pay. I am devastated, Sheriff Israel said. Sick to my stomach. He never went in. In addition, the department released records that show multiple agencies had warning signs that Nicholas Cruz was troubled. Well, that's a different story. Let's see here. Israel said two other deputies, Edward Eason and Guntis Trejis, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, Trace, are under investigation and have been put on restrictive duty. I don't know what those other deputies are under investigation for. Is it possible that other deputies were also at the school at that time? I don't know. According to Sheriff Israel, the deputy, Scott Peterson, remained outside Building 12 for about 4 minutes. The shooting lasted about 6 minutes. So for about 2/3 of the time the shooting was going on, this armed deputy who was supposed to be going in the building remained outside the building. When the shooting began, the deputy was inside the school handling a matter with a female student. Now, there's surveillance video of this. A review of surveillance video showed that the deputy was in position and armed, but never entered the building. I want to read that sentence again. A review of surveillance video showed that the deputy was in position and was armed, but never entered the building. He remained stationed outside the building while the shooting went on. Israel said Peterson should have went in, addressed the killer, killed the killer. This is what the Broward County Sheriff said right here. I want to emphasize this. The Broward County Sheriff says the deputy should have went in, addressed the killer, and killed the killer. He said the surveillance video, was part of the investigation, and Israel said it may never be released. So I want to say this. First of all, I have a spot on my glasses here, so let me just clean this up for a second. Now, look, I certainly want to acknowledge that if you hear guns firing, if you hear gunfire going on in a building right next to you, I'm guessing it's a pretty scary thing to go into that building. So I certainly don't want to sit here and say, it's just easy to walk into a building where there's gunfire going on. The issue here, though, is that this armed deputy is there in part to handle situations like this. And in theory, when you hire somebody as an armed deputy, that person is trained to be ready and willing. They're trained to know how to do it, and they're also, the assumption is that they are ready and willing to go into a building with somebody shooting when something like this happens. So, look, if it was me, I am not used to being in that situation. I'd probably be really scared. But this is an armed school deputy, part of whose job requirement is to go in the building. So I don't want to say it's not a scary thing to go in that building. My point is just that as the sheriff said, look what the sheriff said. He should have went in. He should have addressed the killer. He should have killed the killer. And he did not. So a huge story. And look, I could see some people, saying this really changes the narrative because look, the mainstream media has been reporting a ton on all these cry for gun control after the shooting, and specifically what the gun control measures are supposed to address are school shootings like this. Now, this detail obviously hasn't been part of that debate because it wasn't even revealed until in the last hour or two. I could see somebody saying, look, the system was in place to stop this shooting. We had an armed guard there. If the armed guard just does the job, the shooting, unfortunately, the shooting is going to happen, but it's going to be way less of bad, the shooting. And, maybe we should factor that in, and maybe the situation, maybe we don't need all the measures people are proposing for gun control. Now, other people might say, no, this is irrelevant. We still need all these gun control measures being talked about and more. So my point is just this, that this seems like a very relevant detail and important detail. And I was just shocked today, given that the mainstream media has spent, a week straight or however many days it was since the February 14th. So it's been the last 8 days. The media has just been nonstop basically covering this shooting, especially covering the gun control protests and that kind of stuff. And certainly on MSNBC and CNN, they lean toward more gun control. I'm just shocked, though, given how much coverage, including today, this school shooting has gotten, that when this story comes out, which is this huge story, it gets so little coverage in the mainstream media. Even Fox, I had Fox on right when it broke, and I had Fox on 15 minutes ago, they weren't talking about it. They were talking about like the town hall last night. So I'm just stunned how little coverage this, to me, very important story is getting in the media. So again, we wanted to come on and talk about it with you and get your feedback about the story. So if you want to write in, I am at Lookner on Twitter. You can write to me on Twitter at Lookner. I want to say a quick thanks to, we got a donation from Ron Stahlcup, made a donation and said, donate before the stream is cut off. Hey, when we tried to cover the Florida shooting, the school shooting itself, we were on the air, thousands of people were watching, and then YouTube cut us off for no reason and shut down the channel for 2 days. To this date, we have gotten no response from YouTube as to why they did that. No response. So who knows? So we're on the air now. I hope they don't cut off the stream. I wouldn't expect them to explain why. But thank you, Ron, for donating. We are viewer supported. They've already marked this broadcast unfit for advertisers, so we're not going to get really ad revenue for it of any significance at all. So if you want to support Right Side and help keep us on the air, if you appreciate that we do this kind of coverage, please consider donating. You can donate by going to the bottom of the YouTube chat. There's a dollar sign there. That's how we pay our bills. So if you want to donate, click on the dollar sign at the bottom of the YouTube chat or go to rsbn.tv/donate, rsbn.tv/donate. So I want to read a couple more of these stories about this incident, but first I want to see if there are any comments from you guys yet on this. Again, write to me on Twitter if you have comments on this story. Let's see here. Rocky Sanchez writes, the killer was allowed to roam free and kill children because the armed Florida school officer never performed his duty. This fact came out one day after fake news CNN held a scripted gun control rally. Hold on to your guns, folks, and never give them up. Rocky Sanchez. Now, regarding the comment about the scripted rally, I saw a report claimed that the CNN town hall was somehow scripted. CNN has denied it today. I haven't done a lot of background reading on that, so I'm not familiar. I do know CNN denied it. But thank you for writing in, Rocky. Pepe USA says, that guy is a coward, pathetic. Reload says, why would they not want the video footage of the officer not going in released? So it's an interesting question. I think Reload, it sounds to me like you're saying, look, if there's video of the shooting, you can understand why they don't want that released. But why would they not want the surveillance video released of the officer not going in? Now, I could see them saying, look, that's it would be a traumatic video for survivors to see, for the parents of the victims to see. So maybe maybe that's a reason they have. I mean, they might have various reasons, and they haven't said what their reasoning is. In terms of, they said it might never be released, but it's a good question, Reload. Sharon Maxey made a donation and said, keep up the good work. Thank you, Sharon. We appreciate it very much. Corey D. Lambert literally said the same thing, made a donation, keep up the good work. Thank you, Corey. Thank you very much for your donation. And Cindy Hoffman made a very generous donation. Thank you, Cindy, and said, YouTube, Google, Facebook are trying to silence us. Not acceptable. Thank you, RSBN, for what you do. Thank you, Cindy. And Jerry made a donation, Jerry OOG, and said, RSBN and Steve Lookner rock the best, rock with the best in breaking news coverage. And look, I'm not sitting here taking a position on gun control. I'm just saying I was just stunned at the lack of mainstream media coverage on this when it was breaking, and I can't watch the news and talk to you at the same time. I do know this also. I had the news on at the top of the hour, and I know CNN and MSNBC spent at least 10 minutes each talking about the Manafort stuff and never mentioned this. Now, maybe by now they're discussing it on the air, but as I said, when it first happened, they literally just read the story and then moved on to something else. I listened to both of them when it first came out. Light Switch, thank you for the donation as well, Light Switch. Much appreciated. Thank you. All right, so I want to read some more about this, and I want to get your comments. So write to me if you have comments. At Lookner on Twitter is where to reach me, at Lookner. But let me give you more details about this story here. Let's read another one of the articles. This is from the Broward County paper. I believe it's in Broward County, Sun Sentinel. Stoneman Douglas cop resigns. Sheriff said he should have killed the killer. So let's look at this one. The police officer assigned to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas. So this was a police officer. It's not like a private security guard. This says police officer. which makes it extra, confusing that he didn't go in, because you'd think if the person's a police officer, that's somebody who in their normal line of duty might be expected to confront a shooter. So it's a little odd the person never entered the building. The police officer assigned to Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School resigned Thursday under investigation for failing to enter the building as a gunman opened fire and killed 17 people. Now, somebody on Twitter made a comment that made me think, is a possible reason that the police officer, the comment didn't say this, but it made me think about this. Is it possible that the police officer heard the firing and thought that the shooter had a more powerful weapon than he did somehow? I don't know. I feel though like if you're a police officer and part of your job is to confront a shooter, given that past shooters at schools have had AR-15s, then you should be prepared to go in when a shooter with an AR-15 is shooting. It seems like that's not an unpredictable occurrence or an unanticipatable occurrence. Anyways, let me continue with the story. But first, Jason Clements made a donation from Canada. Thank you, Jason. Jason says, I hope I have a gun in this kind of situation, but if I don't, then the shooter better be prepared to get his throat ripped out. Thank you, Jason, for the donation. All right, let's continue this story. This is the Sun Sentinel version of the story. Sheriff Scott Israel of Broward County said Deputy Scott Peterson should have went in, addressed the killer, killed the killer. Peterson, 54 years old, came under scrutiny after Nicholas Cruz, 19 years old, entered the school with an AR-15 rifle and killed 14 students and 3 educators on Valentine's Day. Let's see. Peterson has been a school resource officer at Stoneman Douglas since 2009. He began working for the sheriff's office in 1985. They give his annual salary. I don't know why that's really relevant. But he's been in the sheriff's office for a good, 33 years. The sheriff's office released documents Thursday showing that Peterson was put under an internal investigation the day before. Israel said that Peterson was suspended without pay. The agency also announced that it was placing 2 officers on a restricted assignment while a separate internal investigation took place. So a big question here is, why are these 2 other officers being investigated? Might they have been at the school as well? We've just seen reported from a couple different sources, 2 other officers are being placed under investigation. See, we saw it in the first article. Look. I know it's here. 2 other school deputies have been put on restrictive duty. Why is that? Another question I have is, this news came out today. So I didn't hear anything about this before today. Was the police department sitting on this information? Because to me, they had to know that this officer was working there. They had to know as soon as the shooting happened that this officer was working at the school. They know who's working at the school. And I would think pretty quickly, I would be shocked if that day the police hadn't talked to the guy. Now, actually, let me say this. What might have happened is the guy might have lied about what he did, and then they looked at the surveillance video and then said, oh my gosh, on the surveillance video, the officer just sits there and doesn't go in. So it says, a review of surveillance video, according to Miami Herald, showed the deputy was in position and armed but never entered the building. But does it really take 6 days to look at the surveillance video? Or actually 7 or 8 days, because the shooting was 8 days ago. I mean, wouldn't they look at the surveillance video in the next, say, I'd like to think within 24 hours of the shooting, they'd look at the surveillance video. But the news that the officer never went in the building just came out today. Is it possible that the Broward Police Department was sitting on this information? If not, why wasn't this information made public sooner? I mean, if you're cynical, you might say, well, they would have been incredibly embarrassed about this information, and they basically held the information as long as they could to let the story die down as much as it could. Now, maybe that's not. Maybe there's an innocent explanation for why this information didn't come out sooner. Again, though, if it's on a surveillance video, I have a hard time believing it took them a week to watch the surveillance video. But just my thoughts. Well, maybe you have a thought on this. Give me a shout on Twitter, @Lookner, @LOOKNER. Let me know what you think about this. Let me check and see if other people have written in. I give you, interesting question, says, did someone give the stand down order till backup arrived? That's what I want to know. Now, the sheriff's quote, I forgive you, is, the sheriff's quote said, we have the quote here, Peterson should have went in, addressed the killer, killed the killer. So that would imply there was no stand down order. Because if there was a stand down order and the sheriff knew that, I don't think the sheriff would be saying that Peterson should have went in and addressed the killer and killed the killer. So if there was a stand down order, that means the sheriff is lying here. But from what the sheriff said, that would imply there was no stand down order. Brian N. says, hey, Steve, Peterson should have been fired and not allowed to resign or retire. He did not perform the most important task of his job. So I think what you're saying, Brian N., is that maybe when somebody retired, he resigned today, is it possible when somebody resigns, they get certain things they wouldn't get if they were fired? Is that possible? I don't know. I don't know what the deal with that is. You think he should have been fired. He was suspended without pay. Now, I don't know if he was suspended without pay pending some investigation or something, but he was suspended without pay. But so I don't know the nuts and bolts of why he resigned, and does he get any benefit from resigning he wouldn't get otherwise. I don't know about that. It's an interesting question, Brian. Rare Patriot writes in, so sad this armed guard betrayed his fellow Americans in the most dishonorable way. Thanks for the live coverage. Keep up the great work, RSBN. And let me repeat, I certainly don't think it's easy at all, even for somebody trained. I would think it's not easy to go into a building where there's a shooter rapidly firing. So, and I certainly think any armed guard who went into that building would be showing an incredible degree of courage. However, the point is, that's part of the job description. So someone shouldn't be hired and shouldn't be taking that job unless they are fully prepared to enter a building in just this sort of circumstance. CJ writes in, school resource officers are typically fully trained law enforcement officers, employed by the municipal law enforcement agency in which the school district is located. For example, the school resource officer at my former middle school was a sheriff's deputy. He had to undergo additional training to become an SRO. And yes, he was a police officer and he had worked for the sheriff's department since 1985. Thank you, CJ, for writing in. Patrick Hostis says they won't release the video of the cop sitting on his butt because they may be prosecuting him in the future. Now, I don't know, can they prosecute him? Is there something that's prosecutable in what he did? I don't know. I honestly don't know. It's a good question. Now, I will say this. Is the department... Is the officer and the department now subject to liability lawsuits from the families? Now that this information is out there, can the family sue the sheriff's department and that individual and say you were negligent in your duty? Or they could say sue the Broward County Sheriff's Department and say you were negligent in hiring an individual who clearly couldn't do this job, and or your training of these people was dysfunctional and negligent. You clearly didn't have good enough training if the officer you hired wouldn't go in the building. So. And I wonder if because of the threat of those lawsuits, that's another reason not to release the video. I don't know. But I would think you might see lawsuits now. I couldn't be less of a legal expert on this kind of particular case, but you have parents some parents might say, my son or daughter is dead now because your officer who was supposed to do the job didn't do the job. Can they sue that officer? Can they sue the department? The police department? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility. Daniel Fulton says that the policeman on paid leave. He was originally suspended without pay. Now he has resigned. I don't know what his pay deal is in terms of resigning. Does he get any kind of pension or anything like that? Black Powder writes in, they definitely kept this hush until their agenda-driven town hall. You're giving them way too much credit, man. They definitely wanted to air their dirty laundry until things simmered down. Now, just to clarify, the police department didn't put on a town hall. That was CNN who put on that town hall. And as far as I'm aware, CNN knew nothing about this until we all knew about it today. My point was, did the sheriff's department keep this hush-hush for a longer time than they actually knew it? I don't know, but it seems like a long time for this information to come out. Let's see. Trump Pence's America. Oh, sorry. Ragnar Lothbrok writes, the sheriff covered up for a week. That's our viewer, this was a response to our tweet about this. That's what our follower Ragnar Lothbrok said. Donna Hicks writes in, we have so many retired vets that would love to be placed at schools. They are trained in combat and will not allow this to happen. David Opp says some of the problem might be that surveillance cameras were 20 minutes delayed off. I don't know much about surveillance cameras at all. My point, though, David, is even if they were delayed, look, the cameras clearly did work and they clearly have this footage. Would it take 7 days to watch this footage? I would think they'd watch the footage as soon as possible to try to figure out what happened. But yet we're not finding out till 8 days later that there was a sheriff's deputy armed on the campus and at the building who never went in, even though they were supposed to. R3KTAF made a donation and said, cops don't engage rifles with pistols. So R3KTAF says the reason the cop didn't go in is that the shooter had an AR-15 and he only had a pistol. But the problem with that argument, though, is look what the sheriff of Broward County knows what kind of weapon the cop had and what kind of weapon the shooter had. And the sheriff of Broward County says Peterson should have went in, addressed the killer, and killed the killer. That tells me that the deputy's responsibility and what they tell the deputies is your responsibility is even if the person has an AR-15, whatever weapon you have, you're supposed to go in and engage the shooter. To me, if it was really true that the shooter having an AR-15 absolved the deputy of the responsibility going in that building, the sheriff wouldn't say this. The sheriff says that the deputy should have went in, addressed the killer, and killed the killer. That implies that the fact that the killer had an AR-15 does not in any way remove the responsibility of the armed guard to go into the building. That's the sheriff. That's not my words. That's the sheriff's words. Patrick Smith, thank you for the donation. Patrick Smith says, the police and government have no duty to protect or serve. Just Google duty to protect or Warren versus D.C. Robert Gile made a donation and says, supporting free press through micropayments. Thank you both for your donation. So you might be referring, Patrick Smith, to when we were talking before, I was talking before about whether the school and the officer might be liable in this case, and you're saying the police and government have no duty to protect or serve. So certainly there's no legal requirement that schools have an armed guard. But I don't know if is there some argument that could be made, which is, look, I'm a parent. I know that school has an armed guard. So that factors into my decision whether to send the kid there. Now, if it turns out that the armed guard is incompetent and you're incompetent in hiring armed guards, and I don't know that, you've kept relevant information from me, that I might have chosen to send my kid elsewhere. Maybe that kind of legal argument can be made. I don't know. I'm just saying. I certainly think it's possible that the school and the officer might be liable. Who knows? The city might be liable too. I just don't know. Just throwing that out there. Hey, we got a donation from Wally in British pounds and said Britain welcomes Trump. Thank you for the donation, Wally. Much appreciated. Let me read you one more story about this. There's different stories in different publications, and I want to show you different ones because they might have different information. This one is actually from the New York Times. And it says, Armed sheriff's deputy never went in during Florida shooting. Now, all right, so this is new information. I hadn't seen this before. This says the only armed security guard on campus. Because we heard that there are 2 other sheriff's deputies who are under investigation right now. And I was wondering, wait, were they on campus too? Now, maybe they were unarmed but on the campus at the same time, and maybe they didn't do what they were supposed to. I don't know. But the New York Times says this is the only armed security guard on campus. And this person never went into a building to try and take down the shooting suspect, Sheriff Scott Israel of Broward County said at a news conference today. Scott Peterson, the sheriff's deputy, resigned after the sheriff placed him under an internal affairs investigation and suspended without pay. We heard that in another story, suspended him without pay, for failing to meet the standards of the sheriff's office. Let's see. Oh, what is this? 2 other deputies have been placed on restricted duty while the department investigates their handling of reports about the gunman well before last week's rampage. So this is interesting. They have placed 2 sheriff's deputies on restricted duty because I guess they received reports about Nikolas Cruz well before the shooting, maybe weeks or months before, and the department is looking into how they handled those reports. That's really interesting. That's very interesting. I hadn't really heard that before. So maybe they think that the proper procedure was, maybe the sheriff's department thinks maybe the proper procedure wasn't followed when earlier reports were made about Nikolas Cruz. Here, check this out. Police protocol requires confronting shooting suspects as quickly as possible. This is according to Sheriff Peterson, apparently. Sheriff Israel, not Sheriff Peterson, Sheriff Israel. Police protocol requires confronting shooting suspects as quickly as possible. Mr. Peterson should have went in, addressed the killer, killed the killer, said the sheriff. Instead, the deputy remained outside the building for upwards of 4 minutes while the shooting suspect was inside. He's accused of killing 17 people in less than 6 minutes. Surveillance video showed Mr. Peterson was doing nothing. He was doing nothing. Mr. Israel described himself as devastated, sick to my stomach. There are no words, he said. Sheriff Israel appeared emotional during the news conference. His eyes appeared to glisten and his speech was sometimes halting. Okay, the New York Times reported on yesterday, so I didn't see the story yesterday. The New York Times reported yesterday that an officer from the Coral Springs Police Department who responded to the shooting had seen Deputy Peterson in a Stoneman Douglas High parking lot. The deputy was seeking cover behind a concrete column leading to a stairwell. Let's look at that report from yesterday. Now, I wonder, does the fact that the sheriff came out with this story today, did that have anything to do with the fact that the New York Times published this story yesterday? Was that information about the cop not going in being sat on? I don't know. Even yesterday, look at this. Yesterday, is this yesterday? Yeah, this was published yesterday. Sheriff Scott Israel said, to his knowledge, deputies followed protocol and did not wait for specialized teams to arrive before going to Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. How is this possible? How is it possible that yesterday the sheriff said, either yesterday or the day before, because this article came out yesterday, how is it possible that at least very recently the sheriff had said the deputies followed protocol? Yet surveillance video revealed that this officer hadn't gone in and hadn't followed protocol. Did they not watch the surveillance video until the last 24 hours? That's kind of confusing. That's very odd. Really, really strange. Thank you for the donation to Christine Bestien. Christine says, when he applied for the job to be an armed protector of our children, he made a promise. What was his background, his experience? Who hired him? Well, the Sheriff's Department hired him. He'd worked for the Sheriff's Department since 1985. He was a police officer. I don't know more than that. That's what I know so far. But very confusing that in this article from yesterday in the New York Times, the sheriff, who today made the announcement that the school officer never went in the building, in this article from yesterday, the sheriff said, to his knowledge, deputies followed protocol. Then he said in this article, the response and actions of Deputy Peterson will be looked at and scrutinized. This article is from yesterday. Why weren't they already being looked at and scrutinized? Let's see what else here. Here we go. A second deputy assigned to the middle school adjacent to the high school was away on training last Wednesday. Here we go. Tim Burton, this is from yesterday's New York Times, a Coral Springs police officer assigned to a nearby elementary school, responded to the shooting. He said in an interview on Wednesday that he had seen Deputy Peterson in a Sherman Douglas High parking lot where at least one school employee believed the gunman might be. Deputy Peterson was seeking cover behind a concrete column leading to a stairwell. I want to get some more of your comments. Thank you for the donation, R3KTAF. Thank you for another donation. And he or she says, I'm a law enforcement officer in California court. We have assault rifles and shotguns here for these situations. Active shooter situations requires a response. Old training was wait for backup. And you're where you are. Thank you for writing in and for your donation. So if you have thoughts on all of this, give me a shout on Twitter, at Lookner, at Lookner. Patrick Hostis says, I would rather die than sit on my A as innocent children are murdered. Nana says, was the security guard on campus? Yes, there is surveillance video of the security guard standing outside the building where the shooting was happening during the shooting. Patrick Hosta says, cops engage shooters who have rifles all the time. Cops must act no matter if they are armed with a pistol or an AR. OG says, I want to see the video proof of that deputy. If not, then I will assume they are making this up for a talking point saying, see, armed guards don't work, ban all guns. Smells fishy to me. Well, actually, so I don't think, first of all, OG, I'm assuming they have the video because it would just be silly of them to come out and say we have video and say it's not going to be released, because it's not that the sheriff didn't say I'm the only one with the video. No one will ever see it. I'm assuming that other authorities with the FBI, like if there was a court case, I'm assuming other people could eventually have legal access to that video. So I can't imagine that the sheriff is lying about the video. Then you'd have to have lots of other people lying about it as well. So I feel pretty confident in that there is a video on which the sheriff on which this behavior happens, which shows the officer not going into the building. James Min says, one officer with a handgun versus a long gun with multiple 30-round magazines is suicide. It's an officer's first job to go home at the end of the day. Well, that's not what the sheriff said. The sheriff said the responsibility of the officer was to go in and engage the shooter. That's what the sheriff said. So that was the officer's job. Me on a Plate says, sad. I wonder how long before the president tweets about this. I give it a few hours. Good question, Me on a Plate. What will President Trump say about this? Now, I certainly think, remember, President Trump has been calling for more armed teachers over the last couple days. So I certainly could see President Trump citing this story as support for his proposal and saying, look, if this person had gone in, this could have stopped the shooting earlier, and this is why we need, people armed, trained people armed on campus. Now, somebody else might say, well, this person was trained. But I think the response would be like, well, something was deficient in the training or something if the person didn't go in and they're supposed to go in. Again, that's part of the job responsibility. Brandon Nevershed writes in. Brandon Nevershed says, Steve, you keep asking why this, why that. The reason is because police lie. It's part of their job's principle is to save face. Well, I hope the police weren't sitting on this information for a week. Dennis Casey says, this does not reflect law enforcement nationwide. Oh, and I'm not arguing it does. I haven't said anything. All that we know is what this one officer did. Now, hold on a second, real quick. Hang on. I want to check something here. So people had written in that like CNN had been talking about this, and right now they're not talking about it. They're talking about something else involving the Florida shooting and gun control. But my point was when I came on the air and when I tweeted about this, my point was not that it wasn't mentioned. I said they mentioned it. My point was they have mentioned it very briefly and was not giving it the attention this story actually deserved. That was my point. Lawrence Miller says, disturbing to say the least. Mary Lynn Daigle sent me a video. I can't show it, Mary Lynn, though, because it's a YouTube video. I can't take a YouTube video from one stream and show it on this stream. That's not allowed. Let me check one thing, though. Here's a clip of the press conference posted by ABC News. So here is the tweet. This is ABC News tweet. And it says, let me just show you this clip that they posted on their Twitter page. About the Broward sheriff saying armed school resource deputy who was on duty at Stoneman Douglas the day of the shooting has been suspended without pay pending investigation. Sheriff Israel says the deputy opted to resign, retire.
Peterson, our school resource deputy. I want to clarify any rumors, conjecture, or stories that have been out there. Scott Peterson was absolutely on campus through this entire event. He was armed. He was in uniform. After seeing video, witness statements, and Scott Peterson's very own statement, I decided this morning to suspend Scott Peterson without pay pending an internal investigation. As is his right, Scott Peterson chose to resign because he has the necessary time with the agency and meets the requirements of retirement. He resigned and /retired. The investigation will continue. We're not going to disclose the video at this time, and we may never disclose the video, depending on the prosecution and the criminal case. But what I saw was a deputy arrive at the west side of Building 12, take up a position, and he never went in.
Now, in that clip there, the sheriff suggests that he says, like, that the deputy had the necessary years to be able to retire. He said he resigned/retired. Now, when you retire, given that you have a certain amount of experience and you retire, that implies to me that this deputy is going to like get certain benefits and stuff, because the way the sheriff was speaking, it's like, well, he had a certain amount of he had the necessary years so he can retire. Retiring because you have a certain amount of years implies like you're going to get a pension and maybe health care and stuff like that, just certain kind of benefits. So it looks to me like because of his contractual situation and his experience amount, he could like retire with full benefits or what, so that's what it sounded like to me. I don't know the whole nuts and bolts of it, but that's what it sounded like to me in the video. Christine Bestian just made a donation and said, #release the video. Thank you, Christine. So again, a lot really confusing about the story. I'm baffled as to why this news is coming out today and this announcement is being made today, when yesterday there was a New York Times story in which the same sheriff is quoted as saying all of the deputies followed protocol. How could it take that long to look at the surveillance video? If there's surveillance video, don't you just look at it like in the first day? I mean, isn't normal procedure when there's a school shooting to just look at the surveillance video? If there's a lot of it, just pay people to look at it. But, especially if the guy's standing. I mean, if you have surveillance video of the building where the shooting is going on, while the shooting is going on, it's impossible to me that there's surveillance video of the building where the shooting is happening during the shooting, and it takes them a week to look at that video. I can't believe that. Anyways. Hey, write to me if you have thoughts on this. Give me a shout. @Lookner on Twitter. @Lookner. Me on a Plate says, unfollowed protocol by the FBI and this deputy, not guns, is the reason this tragedy occurred. Cat Church says it's exactly as Wayne LaPierre said this morning. It takes a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. We need more good guys with guns. The good guys can be teachers, administrators. Thank you for writing in. Now, just to be clear, I don't think that the sheriff would say that even if the deputy ran into the building immediately, that would have stopped the entire shooting. The shooting was going on before the deputy was at the building waiting to go in. But perhaps if the deputy had gone in, immediately, that could have prevented some of the deaths and injuries that happened. Luffy writes in, hi, Steve, I am against the government taking away our guns, but to people defense, this shows that security and more officers will not prevent these tragedies. Now, I know everyone would want this officer to have jumped in, but that still takes time and lives would have still been lost. So, Luffy, you're kind of saying what I said, which is that, if the deputy goes in immediately, there's still some shooting that happens before, but maybe it's less. So people can look at it this way, different ways. Somebody might say, look, the deputy was there, so this kind of major shooting wouldn't happen as long as as armed officers are around and they do their jobs. Somebody else might say, well, even if you have armed officers, they're not going to prevent the initial shooting and they can't be everywhere at once. So different people will have different reactions. Thank you, Sherry. I see your post here from CNN. Again, to emphasize, I was not saying that I was not saying that CNN and MSNBC didn't mention this. What I was saying, if you look at my tweet, is that they weren't talking about it much. When it first happened, they said it happened and didn't talk about it at all, and it wasn't being given a lot of emphasis compared to other things. That was my point. Andy T. writes, they have to look at the video and then have 14 meetings. Mr. D. Ebank says, "Hey, Steve, the video of the incident that implicates the officer might not be released to the public until after a trial, if a trial is in his future, because jury selection will become a nightmare, as well as choosing a judge to preside who have never seen the video. The issue is that they will all enter the courtroom with a major bias against the defendant and thus sentence the defendant in their minds, hearts before trial even begins. Guilty or not, the defendant could win on a technicality or whatever they have in the law nowadays that deals with things like race, conflict of interest bias, or whatever they can do nowadays." So I understand that point, Mr. D. Banks. Thanks for writing in. I guess my question is, what would he be charged with? If you don't do your job as a cop, if you get like scared and you don't, fire you don't engage with a shooter, is that a crime? I mean, it's probably against regulations and it's fireable maybe. I don't know if that's a crime. I'm not aware of a criminal action that is. Now, you maybe could get maybe a civil lawsuit filed against you, but I'm not aware if it's literally if the guy, for example, just got cold feet and scared and didn't go in for that reason. I'm not aware of a crime that he would have committed by doing that. Again, he could have violated policy and it could be a fireable offense. I'm not aware that that's a crime. Maybe I'm wrong. Jason Clements writes in, "The time it comes out when Trump supports armed teachers and now fake news comes out to discredit that by saying cops are too afraid to engage a shooter, so why would an armed teacher? We need to ban guns, not armed teachers." And just to be clear, what you're saying, Jason, is that the mainstream, you think the fake news says we need to ban guns, not armed teachers. That's not your view. American Patriot says maybe the sheriff meant his deputies as a whole followed protocol, not meaning to include the school deputy. In that story yesterday, American Patriot, he was saying all the police deputies followed protocol. That's what he said in that's what he said in that story yesterday. I don't know why he was saying that in the story yesterday, given that this surveillance video was out there. And if he hadn't seen it, I don't know why he hadn't seen it yet. Kevin Burnett says, "Would be nice if Lookner would cover the Las Vegas shooting cover-up rather than doing what 99% of the media is doing, buying into the distraction that is the Florida school shooting." I think this is an important story and should be covered, Kevin. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with you on that. Now, hang on one second. Somebody said, Nana says, "I think there's a lot more going on with that security video than meets the eye." And she sent me this link to this Fox story. Florida schools security cameras had a nearly half-hour delay, causing lag in capturing gunmen. The footage was delayed by nearly 30 minutes. They thought they were tracking him live, but there was a 30-minute delay. The security cameras in Broward School District had a 20-minute delay. Video images were delayed 20 minutes and no one told us that. But to me, that's irrelevant to why it took so long to watch the security video of the deputy not going inside the building. Now, look, this shows that they had access to the security video on the day of the shooting. So why wouldn't they just watch? Why would it take a week to watch the security video of the building where you can see the officer not going in? Doesn't make sense to me. Let's see. Kathy Smuskowitz writes, "Hey Steve, as for the video being viewed, too many sounds of Las Vegas, our country's worst mass shooting in history. Did those videos ever get released? This whole story gives me so much aggravated anger, if that makes any sense." Patrick Hostis says even if they could charge the scared cop, they probably wouldn't. Doesn't fit the blame the NRA first agenda. All right, I'm going to make the last call for comments here. We're going to wrap up this stream soon. We're covering this story that there was an armed officer working at the school on the day of the Florida school shooting. He was supposed to go in and engage the shooter immediately. Instead, he hung outside just outside the school, didn't go in for approximately around 4 minutes, and never went in the building. And the sheriff said he was supposed to go in the building and engage the shooter immediately. And he was originally suspended without pay, and then he officially retired. He chose to retire, and he gets retirement, the sheriff implied, because he had a certain amount of years of experience. That's what the sheriff seemed to be saying. If you want to know in the future when we're doing these videos, be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and click the notifications bell when you subscribe. So you get notified. Also, you can follow us on Facebook at Right Side Broadcasting and on Twitter at @RSB Network. We appreciate our moderators who've been moderating tonight, JC and Webster and Real Frank and Guinevere in the YouTube chat, and Common Sense and Gleno on the website. Also, we very much appreciate people who've donated. We are viewer supported. Your donations keep us on the air, allow us to do stories like this. So if you like our coverage, if you like having an alternative to the mainstream media, please consider donating. You can donate by going to the bottom of the YouTube chat and clicking on the little dollar sign at the bottom of the YouTube chat, or go to rsbn.tv/donate, rsbn.tv/donate. And I will be posting about breaking news as I usually do on my Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at Lookner, at Lookner. I post about breaking news all the time, and I'll post more about this even after the broadcast if I hear more details. Andy T. says, I'm cynical and I think the problem will continue regardless of new measures taken. Brian N. says, I guess Sheriff Israel answered this by allowing him to retire, so that he does not lose pension benefits. He should have been fired for being afraid to do his job he signed up for. Now, for all I know, I don't know if they could have fired him, because the sheriff said, well, it was his right to resign or retire. So I don't know how all of that works. Could they have fired him before he retired? And I don't know what the bargaining contract is with the police officers in the city. So that's all detail I don't really know about. Now, about the video not being released, one of the viewers said he mentioned crime and prosecution. Let me just see here. Because I think I have a quote on that. Hang on. Yeah, it says, he said, Israel said he would not release the video, and according to this person, Hawaiian, who I assume took the quote correctly, but I saw this quote elsewhere. He may never release the video depending on the prosecution in criminal case. Now, he might be talking about Nicholas Cruz prosecution. Yeah, here's from the MSN article. It says, hey, MSN is still in business. He may not release a video that shows Peterson's actions at this time and may never do so depending on the prosecution in criminal case. I don't know if that's a Peterson criminal case or a Nicholas Cruz criminal case that's being discussed there. And again, I'm not sure what crime he would have committed. TPTB News Reviewer says, will anyone mention the fact that every one of these events since Columbine have had an active shooter drill the same day? Think there might be a connection. I'm not aware of any connection. I'm not aware of how many of these shootings happened on days with active shooter drills, but I'm not aware of any connection between them. Sightless Seer writes, hire vets as a priority for positions such as janitors, guards, maybe martial art training in schools to teach kids discipline. Can have vets give martial arts instruction as part of PE. Warriors can become guardians. So Sightless Seer wants to see more vets hired in schools. And says, as for funding, that's a good question. Look at what our taxes buy. Would a GoFundMe, the Guardians, could assist in costs? Could schools elect to have GoFundMes for other programs as well? That's from Sightless Seer. One Deplorable Peppy says, I believe there was a screaming person being stabbed, deputies outside. I think that was the case in question. I'm confused. Which case are you talking about? That wasn't happening in this case because that then the sheriff would have mentioned that, I think, today and talked about it. Mr. D. Ebanks says his crime would be negligence. Like criminal negligence? What is criminal negligence? Most crimes involve intentional conduct, but some crimes involve reckless or negligence rather than intentional conduct. The term reckless essentially describes a defendant's simultaneous understanding and disregard of a substantial risk of harm. All right, maybe criminal negligence. I don't know enough about the law to know if that would apply here. Could this possibly be a case of criminal negligence on the part of the officer? One dictionary definition says the failure to use reasonable care to avoid consequences that threaten or harm the safety of the public and that are the foreseeable outcome of acting in a particular manner. Yeah, I'd have to know more to know if this would apply to a cop who doesn't go into a building where there's an active shooter. It's an interesting question, though. But at this point, we're going to wrap up the stream, I think, at this point. Kenneth Foof writes in, Steve, we need new standards applied to the limited resources available for school safety officers. A 54-year-old guard to guard 3,000 plus students. We need the likes of Rambo for that duty. Now, I will say this. There's always a trade-off. More armed guards, there's so many schools out there. If you add up, if you're going to have more armed guards at schools, it's going to cost a lot more money. So there's all kinds of trade-offs here that people have to look at in these cases. I'm not presenting you answers. I'm just giving you considerations. All right, I think we're going to wrap this up. We have been covering this story tonight that came out today, a pretty shocking story that there was an armed Florida school officer at the school, Stoneman Douglas High School, during the shooting, was supposed to go in and engage the shooter, but instead stood outside the building for 4 minutes while the shooter was firing. And initially that officer was suspended without pay. The officer has chosen to retire. So that's what we know right now. And if I hear more about this, I will tweet out about it tonight on my Twitter @Lookner, on Twitter @Lookner. Thank you to everybody who watched and who wrote in your comments and let me read your views on the air. I very much appreciate it. And thank you to our moderators in the chat room, Webster, Real Frank, Jan, Guinevere, JC, and there on the YouTube and on the website, Common Sense and Gleno. And be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. Click the notifications bell to find out when we're coming on the air with these live videos. We do these live news videos all the time. Real quick, I want to just check out the Facebook chat while I have a second here. Bob Meyer says, thanks for the coverage. Thank you, Bob, for saying thanks. Mary Kay Sholas says, did he call for help at least? I have no idea. Don Burke says, thank you. Thank you, Don. Mary Kay Sholas says, is a police officer a school officer or private security? Yes. Is he a school officer, police officer, or private security? This officer was a police officer. Okay, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you for people saying thanks in the chat room. We got, hang on a second here. Edwin Vasquez, Jerry, Rocky Sanchez, Jennifer Madison, R3KT, Swoosh, DM, Ace Ventura, Irene Soto, Sheared Wheel, Elysia, Bob Meyer, thanks. Bob Meyer says, sending money, good broadcast. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, we are viewer supported, so if you like the broadcast, hope you consider donating because that's what keeps us on the air. We can't stay on the air otherwise. Thank you, Swoosh. Thanks, Irene Soto. Oh, I forgot to check my email. One last email from D. McNamara. D. McNamara says, I think the big picture is the incompetency of parents choosing to let derelict government personnel at all levels of our society protect their children. I'm thankful my parents enrolled me in private school my whole life. That kid had and sent out all the warning signs. He was going to do something bad without intervention, and yet not one did a single thing. Blame the police, blame the schools and administration, blame the feds. The list goes on. If I was chosen on the jury for his criminal case, I'd find him, Mr. Cruz, not guilty based on his psychological issues and no one doing a damn thing about it prior to the tragedy. So that is from our viewer, D. McNamara. All right, we're wrapping this up. If I hear more tonight, I will post on my Twitter account at Lookner. You can follow me there. At RSB Network is Right Side Broadcasting's Twitter account. And thank you, Diane Burns, for saying thanks. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andrew Martineau. And thank you, everybody, for watching and joining us here. And thank you for sending in all of your comments again and participating in the broadcast and letting me share them and read them on the air. All right. That's it for this broadcast right now. Thanks for joining Right Side. If there's more breaking news tonight, we will come back on the air and cover it. But for now, I am Steve Lookner. From all of us here at Right Side Broadcasting, have a good evening, and we will see you soon with more news.
Scott Peterson, but what I saw was, and we may never disclose the video, the investigation will continue. The requirements of retirement, has the necessary time with the agency, and meets the, as is his right. Scott Peterson, without pay, pending an internal investigation. As is his right, Scott Peterson chose to resign because he has the necessary time with the agency and meets the requirements of retirement. He resigned and / retired. The investigation agency and meets the requirements of retirement. He has the necessary time with the agency and meets the requirements of retirement.